couple years ago, a chief information security officer pulled me aside and he said, Nicole, I enjoyed your talk, but if you want my frank opinion on the matter, I think it's time we stop admiring the problem and we start talking about real solutions. And so I continue to be invited to speak at forums like this, but I've made this decision, I'm not going to go anymore unless I have a chance to talk about the solutions. And I set up this cyber moonshot fund with this idea, and I didn't want to be a venture capitalist. I really came at this as a journalist. I just wanted the best possible answer to these attack vectors that I had spent a decade covering. And so I set out to find, okay, who are the people and technologies who can answer these various attack vectors? And 3 of them are sitting on stage. So I'll start with Rick. Rick is the founder of WitnessAI, and he was the answer to this question I had of how do we can't be no people in security. We can't say, no, you can't use AI, you can't use agents, there's just too much risk. We have to be yes, and we need to do it securely, people. And so when I sort of scoured the world to see, okay, what is the best early stage startup looking at this issue of how do we enable employees to securely use AI without the nightmare of data leakage and securely use MCPs and agents, I found Rick at WitnessAI. So I will shut up and I'll because we're on limited time here, I'm just going to go sort of one by one. So I'll ask Rick a couple questions before I move on and introduce you to Garrett and Andy. But Rick, talk to us about the guardrail, how you've gone about setting up guardrails around how employees engage with AI tooling.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that's come out of the customers that we have goes to your point of, I've been in security for decades, and every chief information security officer I used to deal with was always Dr. No. Block it, block it, block it. No one's saying that for AI. It's how do I get this thing used? So I think, and people talk about trust, I think the issue in AI in the enterprise is less trust and more confidence. And the reason I say that is, trust is your belief in somebody else's ability. Confidence is your belief in your own ability. And so we want to give companies, large enterprises, the confidence to adopt AI, even in cases where they don't necessarily trust the AI itself. So for example, I want my employees to be able to use all these magic tools safely, even though some of those tools may or may not be safe. I want to be able to roll out models and chatbots to do business, sell tickets, whatever, and not have those things get attacked or do something worse. Let me ask you, so I've got about a dozen POCs where large companies are standing up their own B2C AI apps. Do you know what the first thing that happens is when they turn them on in testing?
Someone tries to get free miles, a free rental car,
The first thing is every single one of them recommends the competitor. I'm going to Puerto Vallarta, I have this much budget, Hotel X, where should I stay? And it says Hotel Y has a great deal. So when we talk about confidence, guardrails aren't just, hey, scary AI is going to knock over my AI. It's how do I adopt this stuff in a way that doesn't make my company look stupid? It doesn't make my CIO put them on the front of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal for a data loss. So we found is you have to do something hard, which is live between the people, the apps, and the agents, capture traffic on the wire, and allow things to go through safely. So someone may, best intentions gone awry, ask for help. We saw this at a couple places. Call center in India, hey, help me write this English, help my English grammar in this response I'm sending back to this large credit card company with all these live payment cards because I don't want to sound bad. Well, I want that to get fixed, but I don't want a class action lawsuit of payment cards to go through. So this notion of guardrails that allow you to get answers as opposed to guardrails that block you, and guardrails that allow you to roll apps out and they don't embarrass you, like that's a hard thing to build, and we build that so companies have the confidence to adopt these things safely.
What are some of the other near misses that that Witness has caught?
Well, in addition to things like outsourced call centers inadvertently putting things in they shouldn't, one of our customers does multiple billions of dollars a year through their mobile app, and a developer put the entire source code for their whole mobile app into ChatGPT and said, rewrite this for me and fix it. CISO nearly lost his mind. We are seeing, you're seeing things like I roll out my bot and it recommends my competitors over and over. The other thing that is starting to happen that we didn't take seriously at first, it's the flip. We had a board of directors say, what if my employees are using these third-party AI apps and one of them tells an employee to jump off the building and self-harm or take a baseball bat to his boss? And we didn't take it seriously. And now you're starting to read about these things happening after people talk to AI therapists. So it's not just how do I protect data from going out, how do I protect my company from being embarrassed by recommending the wrong thing, but also how do I protect my people? And I think, we worried a year or two ago about TikTok as an influence mechanism. And now I'm starting to hear boards say, well, what about these random AI apps? Aren't they doing the same thing to my people? So confidence and safety around AI is different from the historical, let me keep bad stuff out of my network.
How are you thinking about applying the same sort of enabling, empowering guardrails to agents, knowing that there's even more opportunity for them to go off the rails?
Yeah. So agents take all the stuff I talked about and add one much worse layer, which is today they're generally deployed by developers or by people, and they pick up the identity and all the authorizations of the person who built them. So my co-founder, our CTO, says, well, I have this agent on my machine. It can get to my file system. It can get all my AWS credentials. I stand it up, go get a sandwich, and who knows what this thing is going to do. Probably all read about that Replit thing where the agent deleted the guy's file system. So the approach we've had for people talking to AI apps is observe, control, protect. Show me what apps are being used in my environment, shadow AI. Control what people are allowed to do with those apps, so acceptable use. And then protect data, intellectual property, and protect against attacks. Same thing with agents. Show me the agents that are being stood up in my environment. I can catch that stuff at the network level by sniffing the MCP, the protocol, and seeing what's there and what's being passed. Control what they're allowed to do, because these agents call up to a model somewhere to figure out what to do, so you can intercept those things and then protect them from attack. So it's the same kind of thing. You live in the network, you see what's happening, you control what they're allowed to do, sometimes blocking, sometimes routing, sometimes warning, always logging, and then you protect against new types of attacks.
And we'll have some time for questions later, and I'm sure there'll be questions around that. Garrett, that's one of the really frustrating attacks I would cover when I was at the New York Times were these attacks where the victim had the security tooling in place, but for whatever reason, someone missed an alert, or the MFA had shallow deployment, incomplete rollout. Colonial Pipeline, some of you may know, how did a bumbling group of cyber criminals hijack the primary source of gas, jet fuel, and diesel to the eastern seaboard? They forgot to deprovision an employee. That employee's username and password were trading on the dark web, and they didn't have MFA completely rolled out for that account. So it always came down to sort of these frustrating gaps in security. And what Garrett's company does, Reach Security, he can tell you a little bit about, but it's basically an AI virtual assistant for security operators that shows them where they have shallow deployment, incomplete rollout, potentially misconfiguration gaps. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why don't we just start there? What is required to spot those gaps in the security estate or security architecture before attackers do?
So we have one advantage as defenders. In your talk on AI prior to this, and certainly AI guardrails hits on this note where adversaries are using AI to try to get in. The one advantage we have as the owners of those networks or defenders is that we actually understand and have the context of how our business runs how we are currently protecting it, ideally what data matters. Maybe you're using Rick's product, you understand how AI is being used internally. And those are all advantages. However, being proactive or preventative by nature is incredibly challenging. And it's somewhat challenging because of the conversations that have to happen between security folks and the rest of the business, right? If security was doing its job, it would take away the laptop. If IT is doing its job, it would give you the laptop, right? And so there's this really tug of war that happens. And so the right approach is giving both IT and security an operating system layer, an assistance layer that can go out and ask the questions for them empirically or objectively with data versus interviews, versus conversations with consultants or otherwise. And so the right approach, and of course, humbly, our opinion, the right approach is one where we connect into that vast amount of security and IT infrastructure that you've already purchased and deployed and let technology begin asking the questions, interrogating the products to find you have multi-factor authentication deployed, but it turns out that 10% of your organization is still missing it. Or one of your executives asked to allow this particular email address, and IT did a star@gmail.com, which then lets you accept anything from gmail.com, spam or otherwise. Now your board is getting emails from internal spam and asking them for routing numbers. So ideally, to be proactive, you have the time. And security teams and IT teams don't have the time to do that. And so by bringing in technology that can do this at, call it, millisecond speed and do that discovery work for you, you can end up doing a lot of work up front to determine what are the best things that I should prioritize to protect my business, what value will they bring, which users will they impact. And that was really the idea coming out of Palo Alto Networks a handful of years ago.
What are some of the biggest blind spots you've uncovered in your POCs or partnerships?
So there are a few different lenses to look at this from. The first lens would be, and I'll frame it in questions, and I'm not sure how much you talked about ransomware. I flew in, so I missed some of this. But the first question a business might ask or just say is, hey, tell me if I ever have anything turned off that could stop ransomware. Think of that question. Think of how you would annotate data to give an LLM or agents the ability to go figure this out. And the truth is, with some amount of expertise, domain-specific knowledge pumped into large language models, you can figure this out. That's the first thing. They find out that somebody did an exception for a new software they're rolling out, and they accidentally just went ahead and turned off a bunch of modules and enabled anything to run on the C drive, which would be like the worst case scenario. We've seen that. And at a very, very big financial institution. And so you have those questions that need to be answered. The other type of question that's actually much more challenging and why you need, the prior person speaking was talking almost about domain-specific models, domain-specific expertise, is when you answer the question of how should I deploy my security infrastructure to stop ransomware? Now that's an incredibly complex question. You quite honestly have trillions of options here between all the tools you have available to you. And so what we see at that level of questioning is architects or security engineers believing that something was deployed per their guidance and then finding out that it wasn't. Ransomware modules turned off on a particular product area. The ransomware module's turned on, but it isn't applied to the network policy on a SASE product or work from home internet solution. So these things happen, and when they happen at scale across hundreds of thousands of users or a very complex, almost Rome-esque, built on top of each other organization, they become really hard to answer and spot proactively.
The attack I always remember was Target. Attackers got in through the HVAC system. They used some mom and pop HVAC system, and they didn't have MFA engaged or whatever it was. So they got into to Target through their HVAC supplier, and then they were able to crawl into the point of sale systems, and that's how they were able to steal millions of credit card numbers. But they did use FireEye, and FireEye had thrown off an alert, and the security team had missed it because it was across time zones or whatever it was. How would Reach sort of answer that issue?
Well, you see two investment theses right now in the market. Investments in bringing AI for security operations centers to help try to find that needle in the haystack and suss that out. And that's what I would refer to as reactive and valuable, but honestly, many of you probably employ third parties to manage your security operations centers at this point. I think it's somewhat of a dying business, except for the biggest companies out there. The other side of the coin is proactive or preventative. And so what your mindset has to be there is, how do I reduce the amount of exhaust that feeds into the security operations center so that higher fidelity signal comes in? With FireEye being a detection product, how Reach helps there is it ensures that the preventative controls and the FireEye product are configured in such a way to elevate those types of alerts. In this case, a third-party resource that had come in with a compromised credential, which you could have pulled signal from another source to say it was compromised, and then gone ahead and elevated that alert in terms of priority. At the end of the day, it's all about prioritization, unless you throw more tech at to try to drive down the number of alerts you react to. So in our mindset, let's invest in being preventative or proactive. Somewhat from my world of being at Palo Alto Networks prior, I built a product that was notorious for killing FireEye's business. So that tells you my mindset was preventative versus reactive. In that mindset, it was always, how could we reprogram fast enough to create immunity, right, and proactively prevent things? So that's how we would have approached it if they would have had Palo Alto Networks products and Reach.
So, I think Rick and Garrett are both in the preventative side of the business, but one area where we just always see things fall apart is on the other side, which is incident response. And the name of the game, and the word was used a couple times already up here, is resilience. The other thing we talk about a lot is reducing the blast radius. And when we look at incident response, I heard this over and over and over again from CISOs, which was every time there was a major incident, I went from being in a highly technical security role to a communications role, because I basically spent all my time with our C-suite and with the board. And then maybe at 10 p.m., I'd have time to get the latest update from our security team. And sometimes there were these horrible nightmares where actually the CISO faced huge personal liability for what happened over the course of the incident response. And the two cases that come up over and over again are Uber and also SolarWinds, where their CISOs were actually charged with felony charges, I think by the FTC in both cases. And a lot of their security team's words were used against them. Security people are notorious for being pretty critical and complaining a lot. But so they would, in those lawsuits, they would capture, a security engineer saying how poor their security was, how they could have done all these other things. And ultimately that was used back against the CISO. So we were falling into this really dangerous place where no one really wants to be a CISO anymore. In fact, if you go to these sort of conferences for deputy CISOs and number twos, and you anonymously poll them and say, who actually wants to be a CISO, it keeps dropping. And when you interrogate, why does this keep happening? They say it's just too much liability. And you don't get to do the interesting threat intelligence detection, these more interesting jobs. No one actually wants the liability anymore. So it's a really, really it's becoming an urgent area, is how do we make sure that we handle incident response more efficiently and limit CISO liability in the course of incident response. And also then when you layer on what we're about to see with the AI attack tsunami that's coming, where we're going to be scanned for every misconfiguration error, every lapse in MFA, every lapse in patching, we're going to see more and more incidents. And so the question I had was, how do we basically bring down that breach time cycle to a more manageable place? And how do we handle incident response more efficiently so that we can learn from each of these incidents that are going to keep happening with more and more frequency, which brought me to Andy and BreachRX. So that was a big lead up there. But why don't you tell us what BreachRX does, and we can go from there.
And for everybody's context, my background is 20 years of data breach litigation, privacy law, cybersecurity law, and so a lot of these data breaches, I say, I've lived the long tail, worst case consequences with many clients over the years. I also worked in-house in Walmart's general counsel's office for a bit. And I think a lot of these problems stem from, we've been approaching incident response the same way for 2 decades, even though the volume and the frequency of this, the ubiquitousness of incidents has gone up, and that's been, we're going to have a paper incident response plan, we're going to have cyber insurance in place, we're going to have the best people on retainer, and then we're just going to rely on these heroic efforts of those people when stuff happens. And it's also being viewed as purely a security or technical problem, when really as soon as an incident happens, it becomes a business-wide problem. And I think an example, one of our customers recently that we brought on over the last year, they had gone through their large global transportation company. They'd gone through a ransomware event where basically they couldn't ship anything through all their digital channels. All of a sudden they had to revert everything to paper while this is going on. You can imagine what that does to a company like that's revenue to slow things down at that magnitude for an extended period of time. And what they found is they did all these best practice things. They did the annual tabletop, they did all these things, even prepared for a ransomware scenario. But when it actually happens, it's a lot of these things that Nicole's talking about, is all of a sudden you're coordinating across an entire business that is down, is desperate, is stressed, is trying to figure out what should we do now, and you're calling in experts that are experts at incident response, but they're not an expert in your business. And so you find this paper incident response plan is really like a triage list of phone numbers and people, an escalation path, which also you're judged on, by the way, in litigation later on whether you followed it, but no one opens it because it doesn't actually help you solve the problem. And so our approach is how do we, looking at all these worst case consequences that can happen, a lot of this is about how do we shrink the time horizon down, but also how do we take personal liability off the table? How do we reduce fines? And so we bake that into our automation so that when something happens, whatever limited details that are going on, and the team across the business, not just security, legal, but comms, compliance, business units, people know exactly what to do, and it's very clear who's responsible for what. So you really can guide a company beginning to end, but also in a very bespoke way because every business is different. So it has to really be operationalized, the program versus this static reactive approach. And now with a lot of the AI capabilities that we're baking in, that updating that CISOs all complain about, just keeping everybody on the same page. When you think about all these silos of the business that may not even be able to use their normal comms channels to talk, it's really hard to keep people on the same page and rowing the same direction. But when you have a centralized platform that's your system of record, and you apply a lot of this LLM technology to it, it's very easy to keep people up to date, people coordinated, and really ensure that at the end of the day, you're able to prove we handled this responsibly. It's a normal part of business to have an incident. We took all the right actions at the right time. And again, we just shrunk that timeline as small as possible.
You're sort of in a unique position to maybe speak to this uptick in AI automated or AI driven attacks. Are your customers seeing an uptick in frequency right now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there was a stat out there recently that they're seeing AI enhanced attacks increasing, I think 50% year over year just in the last 2 years. I'm sure thinking about all of the ways that enterprises are implementing AI technology, you think about the attackers with just total unfettered access to this, the ways that they can leverage it against companies, you're only going to see that increase. So a lot of our customers, it's not just the typical, okay, we're going to operationalize what we're going to do for ransomware, phishing, all these kind of malware, data loss, all the different scenarios that you might think of. All of those now coupled with AI enhancing abilities to attack, AI enhancing abilities to social engineer. And then you also have all the internal ways that you're now using AI as a company, and that's a whole nother part of your threat surface to be attacked on. And so having playbooks that are operationalized and automated for what do I do when those scenarios happen so that I can avoid being on the page of the New York Times and all the things that become really embarrassing about that. How do we plan for that ahead of time and know exactly what to do instead of like, oh, this happened, what do we do? We've never thought of this before. And that thought exercise of an annual tabletop is not going to be the actual muscle memory to execute it. It's just going to be like, yeah, we had a really fun conversation about that one day a year ago.
Another thing that I really appreciate about BreachRX was, and I know this really well from my time in journalism, but I also teach a class at Stanford Business School about cyber crisis communications. One underappreciated part of cybersecurity, I think, but every CISO who sort of lived these breaches will agree, is you're not judged by how well you managed the security around your incident. You're judged by how well you communicated how you managed the security around your incident. And that's where a lot of these organizations and where incident response falls apart, is I think people underestimate how important the sort of PR around these events are. And so one of the things that BreachRX did that I really appreciated when I first met Andy was you're able to basically click a button now, right? And AI can generate like an update for your PR team that the PR team can use in their communications with reporters and other.
Yeah, and a lot of ways too with, there's always a lot of legal considerations when it goes into these kind of statements that you're going to make. And so being able to pre-write that in a way that is fairly close to what you want it to say from a legal perspective, especially when you have a number of people, technical people that are working on an incident that may not be thinking about the most non-libel way to write something. Super helpful to make sure all of your statements are going to align to a really clean record that makes it defensible that you did.
Or lawyered up.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll ask each of you the same question. I left us with a lot of doom and gloom earlier. I apologize. It's what I do these days. But I do want to leave everyone with a note of optimism. So I'd love to go down the line and just ask each of you, we know what's coming in terms of AI-augmented attacks, and I think it's clear there will be very little room for human error going into this next chapter of cyber attacks. But what gives you the most amount of optimism about how we could potentially use LLMs or AI or more traditional tooling to stay one step ahead of the attackers? Want to go first, Rick?
Sure, I will. So one of the things we built is an AI firewall, and it has the highest prompt injection efficacy of anything we've benchmarked in the world. And the way we did that was we used AI to build offensive engines to build synthetic data that attacks our defensive engines. And I think that ability to use AI as like 10,000 of your own personal attackers to test your defenses and harden your own systems is something that is new. And it will, over time, give the defenders, sort of tilt the scales back toward the defenders in ways we didn't have before.
Love that. Garrett?
So security is pretty curmudgeon-y. I think that's fair to say, right? But one of the things that I've seen with AI coming into the picture are suppose two things. One thing is that curmudgeonous behavior has shifted to more pragmatism. So how could we use this logically to help us? AI specifically, and so you have a lot of security folks coming up with new, unique ways to leverage AI for good and to protect the business. The second piece of this, which I think is overlooked historically in the past with other digital transformations, is security has a seat at the table, not just to figure out how to secure the use of AI, but actually use it, which I think we're seeing a lot of security teams get budget for using AI inside of their own business units. And I think that's the first time I've seen it being in security for almost 2 decades, where it wasn't, hey, catch up and figure out how to protect this, but hey, we have this innovation happening. How can you use that to better your part of the business? So I'd say that gives me a lot of hope for my kids when they get into high school or college or graduate. So.
Yeah, I think for me, there's 2 main areas that I see optimism. One, we have a constant shortage of talent in security, and so being able to take and augment your security team and take care of like some of the kind of tier 1 type of aspects of security incident response with the help of AI that will take some time for them to learn and all those things. But I think that's a big opportunity so that you can do more with less. I think another piece for us that we look at is, and kind of comparing this to the threat intelligence world, for a long time, it was very siloed where you'd have threat intelligence information. And then once we started sharing that information and it was able to be, shared with, multiple organizations, you really benefit all boats. I think in incident response, we're finding as we add more and more of these, large Fortune 500 customers onto our, as part of our customer base and just broader customer base in general, all the learnings and all the incidents that everybody are facing and the ways that we can bring that learning, democratize it to everybody so that, you benefit from the breach another company went through and have that much better of a response, I think is a huge opportunity.
All right, I think we are over time, but thank you for coming on this long security journey with us today. Really appreciate it, and I will be around for a little bit longer. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.